of time. And so we've got to actually think about what are the building materials that we're using. How can we encourage more recycling of waste, whether it's agricultural or plastic, turn it into construction materials? Because ultimately, that is also part of reducing the waste management from our countries and therefore being environmentally conscious. Thank you.
Dr. Habib, you've mentioned you're also a climate scientist. What's the link between a green city and climate change?
When you talk about green city, we are talking about strategies of implementing adaptation and mitigation to climate change. So green city is a city that, as I said earlier, that have efficient public transportation, that have effective waste management system, that have proper urban design that inculcates bike lane for people to ride their bikes. I'm very much interested in this bike of a thing because there are several health benefits to even riding bike. Saves your money. And of course, we Africans we complain that we don't have money. We must learn of how to even save and conserve our money. So we are talking about cities that is that is livable. She was talking about where to build, where to plant trees. I lived 6 out of my lives in Lagos, whereby buildings are close to each other. And my former house, I could easily peep into another house and see what they are doing in that particular house. So tell me, where do you want me to plant trees in Lagos? We have about 120 informal settlements in Lagos, where people are living, in such conditions that are, making them vulnerable to extreme climate change. So we must do a lot by making sure that we have effective public transportation, waste management system, and water conservation to ensure that we have a greener city. And as I said earlier, a greener city is in a way adaptable to and adaptable to climate change effects. So there is a strong correlation between green cities and climate change. Thank you.
Susan, so when you've designed the building or a house and it's built, would putting a solar panel on the roof, is that enough to make that, can I comfortably say my house is green if I have a solar panel on the roof?
That's a very interesting question, Zainab. And it is interesting because a lot of people think combining one or two elements of what has been termed as a green element makes your building green. It is not true, but it has some truth in it. There are many components into a building. One of the things we look at when we are judging whether a building is green or not, you use as little energy as possible to maintain your building, to build and maintain your building. Your building materials also have little, for you to get the building material, use as little energy as possible, so you are as close to the natural material as possible. And the third, in running the house, the energy requirements of the house, you use as little as possible. So that is where a lot of emphasis has been put on running the house. But what about the actual design of the house? Is your house naturally ventilated? Is your house naturally lit? Do you need to put on your bulbs throughout the day? Do you need to put mechanical ventilation in your building throughout the day? And most offices, because of their construction designs, you tend to find that they use mechanical ventilation.
Like ACs.
Yes, like ACs, which is beating the purpose of trying to be green. So in this case, one of the things we really struggle about in Kenya, a lot of the mitigation factors of green buildings are not pro-poor. We are leaving a lot of people behind in the solutions we have for greening buildings. That is why, as Dr. Habib has mentioned, a lot of people are living in places where you can just look into your neighbor's house. We are not obeying any planning regulations, not just in Kenya, but in a lot of informal areas. We are not leaving space for natural lighting. We are not leaving space for pedestrian walkways. And even when we do, business happens on the pedestrian walkways. Yes. So it beats the purpose.
The roads, when we build the roads, we've not factored in the cyclists or people who will be walking.
Yes. In fact, I'm a cyclist. I'm an ardent Nairobi cyclist. And one of the biggest problems is even when we have been provided with a cycling lane, nobody
will be there.
Nobody really cares about the cyclist.
Yes.
In fact, the people who ride motorbikes think that is their path. They even tell you they have drawn a motorbike on the cyclist lane. So it's a big problem. One of the things is trying to get people to understand this green and climate debate is not only for scholars, is not only for builders, is not only for architects and urban planners, it is for everyone. Thank you.
There was a time I tried to tell myself that I'd be a cyclist and cycle to work, and I never did it again because when I was leaving work, a matatu almost hit me, and I was so terrified, and I stored the bike, and I've never touched it again. But at least I'm doing my little bit by walking. I walk to work at least. Maurice, picking up from where Susan has left off, what is the missing link? What are we missing here? Is it the education? Is it the skills? Or are we just lazy?
It's probably all of the above. Let me put it this way, Zainab. I'm glad to sit next to some cyclists. Some of us, when we were growing up, a bicycle was actually, unlike my brother Habib, that was actually a status. That was actually a status symbol for some. So it's also about perspectives. Earlier on, when I spoke about those numbers, 238, 971 million respectively, there's a sense in which we talk about Africa as a giant of needs. But we are also a giant of opportunities. If you think about how youthful that population is increasingly educated, very tech savvy. So part of it is how we include the young people into the conversation. They've got to really bring their creativity and innovations into the planning of the cities. But that's about creating the spaces. And if the spaces are not created, young people just simply need to find ways to be at that conversation. That, for me, is a critical one. It's about the inclusivity of the conversation because it goes into the policy making. It goes into the designing of the houses, as my colleagues are talking about. But it also goes into other critical things. Extraction. We've talked about buildings. Beyond the building, it is also a mindset. Most of us here, when we think about building or owning a home, particularly those of us who live in the cities but also have spaces elsewhere, but even when we're building in some parts of the city, we still think in the terms of brick and mortar. We do not think about the other building materials. And that mindset shift is critical because the other or traditional, conventional one is also very extractive. The amount of water you use, the amount of cement that is used, the amount of rock or whatever is very extractive. So it's about a mindset shift as well. It's also about thinking about in an integrated way. How can you think about a house that is also healthy? In the sense that as climate change exacerbates in many ways, one of the areas affected is health. Because areas that previously did not have malaria, for example, are now having malaria because they are warmer, so the mosquitoes can actually inhabit those places. So how do we design houses that actually respond to health questions that people need? That is how you think about greening. It's about the totality of the conversation, how health is impacted by provisions of water, quality water, how we make provision for what my brother and sister are talking about, non-motorized transport. At some point, you've got to walk. But how do we actually encourage more people to walk? It's about increasing security. Because right now, people who run are having even challenges because you're afraid that you may be mugged. So it's also about security. Green cities are not just about providing the amenities. It's actually about facilitating them to be usable, which means Let's get the carrots, the incentives for people to use them, the incentives for private sector to invest in them, but also the sticks. How do we beat people's heads when they're out of line? Thank you.
So all these things you're talking about, Dr. Habib, the transport models, the e-mobility, they all require some sort of infrastructure. But the way, the nature we've seen infrastructure development happening is that it works against nature. We've seen massive numbers of trees cut down to make room for that road that you need to, so that you can put an e-vehicle on it, or so that you can build a cycling lane. Is there a way to do this infrastructure development without disturbing the environment as little as possible?
Yeah, thank you very much. The major problem we have in Africa is that development precedes planning. In a situation whereby development precedes planning, you see building development developed haphazardly. And of recent, we experienced a devastating building collapse in Lagos, whereby several people were killed. I've written a lot of articles on that. So basically, we must, before we even start anything in a city, that is why urban planning is very important. You must have a well-functioning structural and master plan that actually detail every activities, including the transportation network you are talking about. Some of those European cities we are looking towards today, they are planned before development. When there is development, when there is planning before development, you see sustainable cities. You see people living in a healthy environment. You see buildings that are special enough to accommodate people. Especially the informal settlements we have in African countries. Of recent, there was a devastating flood event in some of those informal settlements, whereby people were told that, okay, they must leave that particular place. No, because if we send them away, where would they go? It's like we are trying to solve a problem and creating another problem.
Yes.
So if you chase those people from informal settlements, where would they go? So we must learn from other cities around the world. Look at what Netherlands has been doing over the years. Some of their communities are below sea level. And instead of running away from water, they have learned to live with it by building dikes that are withstanding extreme events every year. So we must learn from other cities around the world, building resilient infrastructure, and we cannot do it alone. It involves integrated approach, whereby people in the community, community members, community representatives, government and non-governmental agencies work together to form what we call livable and sustainable cities.
Susan, I'd like you to pick up from there, and then we can talk a little bit about the urban heat island effect. Infrastructure being so intensive to the point that it modifies the environment, to the point that the urban city you're trying to build is a heat trap. The buildings are absorbing so much heat, the roads are absorbing so much heat, and then releasing this heat at night. The nights are becoming unbearably hot. Maurice there talked about mosquitoes moving into areas where they did not exist before. Do you, as an architect, have anything to do with that, or is it just the people who are building?
I want to take a step back and say most people realized the problems we have with our urban planning and our design during COVID, where we were forced to stay at home. That is the time where, and because COVID affected everyone, it affected the rich, the poor, the young, the old, that is when we realized we are living in a time bomb in our homes. What I would like to say about that, Kenya has a national spatial plan, which many people don't know about. At least 6 counties have also adapted the national spatial plan into their own region-specific spatial plans. But when it comes to construction, very few people follow the physical planning guidelines. So they build the way they want. If you read the building code, as old as it may be, it gives a lot of detailed information about how you're supposed to build, how far the building is supposed to be from the road, what size of road you're supposed to have. But very few people follow such planning regulations. And in that, they beat the purpose of what the planning guidelines were made for. Hence, you see the collapse of buildings, as Dr. Habib has mentioned. Hence, you see a lot of informal construction. Even when you're supposed to go only 4 floors, you're going 8 floors. It is as a result of, one, affordability, because a lot of people want to live near where they work. They don't want to walk too far. Maybe transport cost is very high. And because of public transport is not very efficient, so you find they want to live near where they work. So they build as much as possible. That is why we have a lot of buildings where we are not supposed to have too many buildings. The other thing could be lack of response to our climatic conditions. Some clients will want you to build for them the nice buildings they see in Dubai. Here in tropic Kenya,
Yes.
where we have plenty of sunshine, we have good wind, we have good weather, we don't have any extreme weather. We don't need heating of floors. We don't need cooling of buildings excessively. But somebody wants a design like what they saw somewhere else. And sometimes you say the client is right. But a well-meaning architect will advise the client to be as climate responsive as possible. And I'm glad that nowadays we have the people who give the green certification, and they look at whether you are responsive to the climate where you are building. So we have the EDGE, and we have others who are giving the green certification, so that you are not importing another design from another climatic condition into the tropics. Yeah.
Let me ask you, Susan, if I live in a traditional house, like I have a house in the village, it's not brick and mortar, it's soil, it's grass thatched or iron sheet roofed, how do I make that structure responsive? How do I make it green?
It is already green.
By the fact that it was built
by the fact that it is built by materials that are available locally. Very little embodied energy in the building materials. You are not using any mechanical ventilation. At least make the window bigger, because a lot of traditional houses had very
much light. Yes.
Yes, they don't have much light, but that is also because of the culture and the use of the building. Sometimes you look at the function before you criticize why a building is the way it is. A lot of people never used to spend time inside the building. We didn't have sitting rooms. But now, because a lot of people are spending time watching TV and on their phones, so they have to spend time in the house. So hence the big windows. But in the traditional sense, not many people used to spend a lot of time inside the house. It was more outdoor. Yeah.
Maurice, now that we know the problem, we've talked about, we have the knowledge, Susan here and Dr. Habib here, they're planners. The knowledge is there, so we can't say we don't have the knowledge. We have the knowledge, and we know what the problem is. How do we fix it? Do we need to pull down the buildings we have and start over, or is there a way to work around the mess we've created and fix it?
Thank you. In some cases, you may actually have to tear down some things before you build. Let's just say. That's what I was talking about. Some difficult choices and commitments we need to be made in some cases. In most of the cases, though, it's about incremental adjustments. It is possible. We've seen this. Many houses in the past, for example, were built using asbestos. When it was discovered that asbestos had negative health effects, it was possible to replace that without bringing down the entire building. We are seeing, as Habitat for Humanity, across the world where we work, and we are present in over 70 countries in the world, a lot more people beginning to be engineering their houses to make them much more energy efficient without tearing down those houses. It is possible to increase the size of the windows without necessarily interfering with the structural integrity of that building. What it requires, first and foremost, is a mindset shift, an acknowledgement that we've got to make some changes today if we want something different tomorrow. So that's really about a behavior change, and that's a conversation we must have, and that's why I also celebrate as Habitat for Humanity the partnership we have with NMG, particularly the NTV, that takes us into building in a futuristic way. So that's one. Number two is about rejigging our policies and regulations. Susan has talked about how outdated our building code is. It means, therefore, that we do not incorporate or have not incorporated in that building code emerging technologies for construction. And so it is difficult to enforce them, so we've got to rejig that. The third thing that is related to that is as we infuse more technologies, and by the way, we've worked with a number of kind of emerging impact investors, young people doing amazing things, whether it's Jijenge or Korek or the village. And the village is interesting because it infuses technology that helps young people to kind of look for accommodation close enough to where they're working. So it's really getting some of these things done. Last but not least, in that process, is about giving the incentives. And these incentives can either be legal or they can be beyond legal. How do you, even in terms of tax incentives, those who are doing certain things that are moving in that particular direction, you make it possible for them to enlarge their efforts at getting that happening. Yeah.
Dr. Habib, in your experience as an urban planner, have you seen places where they've had to rethink how a building was built because something was not right with it? Have you had to work on one such project?
Not really, because the major problem is our system of governance. In a situation whereby you rely on people to vote you into power, you don't want to do something that will hurt them, that will make them change their mind. Imagine, take for instance in Lagos now, there are some buildings that have been earmarked to be demolished. However, because of lack of political will, those buildings will never be demolished. And we all know the reasons. If, as a governor, I order that all the buildings that have been marked for demolition should be demolished, people, I mean, even political opponents will take advantage of that. Try to corrupt the mind of people that, you see, it's not building house for you, house is for you. It's chasing you away. So it has to do with our political system, and we need more of education. In a situation whereby you want to embark on your building development, you must engage professionals. Professionals, you must engage them, because one thing I've realized during my course of research is that people try to bypass the normal procedure, cut costs. You know, when you're engaging an urban planner, the money the urban planner will charge will be more than what someone that doesn't know about the profession will charge. So basically, we need more of education. And as I said, we need a kind of integrative approach that will ensure that our people do the right thing at the right time. So people must know, because now we have various building development codes, we have various policies, but people don't really understand. Even those that understand, they don't want to implement some of those things, because when you're implementing some of those things, it will cost you more money, which you want to run away from. So basically, we need more integrated approach, and we need more of education. We need to enlighten our people. Take, for instance, the flood early warning map that was designed in Lagos. People saw it, but they couldn't even connect with it because they don't, average Nigerians doesn't know what a flood warning map is all about. But we need a proper and comprehensive education to, okay, if you build in this kind of area, these are the type of materials you need to use. And there must be political willingness to ensure that we don't find ourselves in a situation whereby we have to demolish more than half of the buildings.
So the three of you, I'd just like to ask you, the three of you, each of you bring different expertise here. You're an urban planner, she's an architect, you're a lawyer. The three of you should be able to convince the governments or the people, the decision makers, that listen, this is how this building should be built. Yet we keep seeing increasingly, the other countries are able to do it and plan their cities efficiently, but Africa seems to be failing. Is it that you do not trust in your expertise to get the governments and decision makers to actually make those decisions, or what is the missing link from your professional point of view? I could start with Maurice there.
Thank you. I think a number of things, and let me conclude just connecting to what my colleagues have said and the point I was making earlier about the outdatedness of the building code requires that we must also do something if we are going forward. We must skill our young people in the ways of building for the future, not in the ways that the past was built. And that requires, again, conversations with the government. What is standing in the way? Goodwill and courage. You see, people actually do know what needs to be done. Is this being frozen in the cold of political cost that is causing the problem? So we actually do just need leaders with some level of courage to be able to do that. Do we have some of them? Yes, we do. But it also means us, as citizens, willing to vote in such leaders. When we think about COVID, one of the lessons that we learned from COVID was when it was said, stay home, stay safe. Of course, questions were, where is home for some people? But the point was, we were all at that moment entrusting our lives and everything else into the hands of government. If there was ever a moment to learn about effective and efficient government, that was the time. But efficient and effective governments do not just happen. They've got to be made to happen. And so let us also, as citizens, not outsource the problem and therefore the solutions to the politicians. Let us own it by voting in leaders that are having the courage to do that. Last but not least is also the opportunity. In May this year, Kisumu County hosted their Free Cities Conference. And that conference was focused on the secondary cities, which means that we actually have an opportunity to green, not so much by focusing on rejigging the old cities that are expanding, that we must do, but in addition, we actually begin to do something different with the emerging cities. We actually have an opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Yes, Susan.
I will pick up from what Dr. Habib was talking about professionals. A lot of people know the use of professionals, but just feign ignorance. It is not that they don't know that they're supposed to have architects or urban designers or engineers. It is just a matter of feigning ignorance, and we can't put it on politicians because even the politicians themselves consult professionals. Yes. I don't think there's any government building that has been done that has not been done through professionals. So a lot of the general public like to feign the ignorance because for you to build, you have to go through some legal processes. There are approvals that you need to get, and there are those requirements for approvals where you're supposed to have specific professionals for those approvals. You're supposed to have followed specific guidelines for your design. But when it comes to implementation, they just ignore. So it is not a matter of not having or not knowing. It is just because
just
you have the money.
No,
ignorance. Because you have the money, you have the say. And one thing I would like to say, when you see a self-made person, be prepared for the horrors of unprofessional work.
Those are the ones who do a lot of unprofessional work. Dr. Habib.
Yeah, picking from what my colleagues have said, we have the policies in African cities. We have them in abundance, but the willingness to enforce the policy is the problem. And that brings me to what I've been saying. Government cannot do it alone. We need support of government needs support of professionals like us. We must work together to ensure that it's going to be impossible for you to embark on your building development without consulting professionals. We must ensure that all our policies are enforced, all our laws, they're there, they're right there. And we professionals, the onus lies on us to ensure that we do the right thing. There's a reason why built environment professionals are called professionals in the first place. They are well trained, they know what they are doing, but they need to ensure that they work in hands with the government. And we citizens must also ensure that we vote people that are ready to lead by example. when we have leaders that we know that even her or him cannot even do something that is illegal, citizens will sit up and do the right thing. Yes. So it's a kind of collective effort that involves governments, people, professionals, and we just have to be we just have to do a kind of collective work to ensure that built environment professionals are on the right track and are doing the right thing.
We've done so many stories from the media perspective. We've done so many stories about private development in the peripheries of the city where you've built your own, it's called a septic tank. You've built your own septic tank, but you're not connected to the sewer line. You've built your own septic tank, but you did not factor in how to empty that tank. So we've done so many stories of an apartment block emptying its septic content into the next apartment block. Such kind of stories. And we are always asking ourselves, this building, when it was built, surely someone must have known this construction was underway, and someone must have inspected it, so they should have known it was not connected to a sewer line. Why are we waiting until you can see the sewage being emptied on the road or in another building for us to see that there's a problem? So, Dr. Habib, you said you're based in Germany. And you've mentioned some of the best practices you've seen around the world. You've mentioned Netherlands. Are there any African cities that you would say are on the right track?
Well, to some extent, this is my first time in Nairobi. And I've been telling people that I've met that to a large extent, Nairobi is leading by example. I'm not saying this because I'm here, but because of what I've seen so far. Look at this particular environment. I'm very sure you can't find this in Lagos. And I've also worked extensively. In Durban. I've worked extensively in Johannesburg. I've not seen something similar to this. To some extent, Nairobi is leading. Is leading by the way. Yeah.
Any other African city?
Well, all other African cities are also trying. So one thing. When I was in Johannesburg, because I spent about 1.5 years there, so I realized that if you have to buy things in these malls or supermarkets, you have to pay for the bags. So, which is a kind of policy that would discourage, a facade loitering of waste around the environment. It's a good policy. And look at what is happening in Nairobi now. I realize that they use more of paper bag, which is a way of preserving the environment, making the environment to be friendly. So those are some of the best practices that all other African countries need to imbibe to ensure that we have a friendly environment. Yeah.
So Nairobi is on the right track.
Yes,
despite our many challenges, we're still on the right track. Susan, have you seen any African city that you would say is on the right track?
Maybe because this is his first time in Nairobi, and I'm sure he has spent it in the upper part of Nairobi. He may say that, because even when we look at what we call best practices in cities, what I was calling a living, breathing, moving city. Maybe this is living and breathing, but is it easy to move through all the means, the public means? Can you walk comfortably? Can you cycle comfortably? No. Some of the cities, even right here in Kenya, that are, I think, on the right track is Kisumu. Kisumu are on this non-motorized transport program, where they have provided many kilometers of pedestrian paths and cycling lanes. And even along the pedestrian paths, they are putting some vegetation, so it is easy for people to walk.
Are those paths being used for the intended purpose?
Yes, they are being used for the intended purpose. Another city is Eldoret. Eldoret, although it is small, they are trying. And because it is beginning, and those that are in the intermediary cities, we are hoping that in the future, when the population gets to the one of Nairobi, they will have been on the right track. But outside Kenya, Kigali. Kigali is an amazing city to be in, both during the day and during the night. Sometimes you even ask, where are the people? That is one of the things that can tell you whether a city is good or not. Even when the population is high. A well-planned city is not disorganized. So people can go where they are going without being confused in the spaces in the city. Thank you.
Maurice, what city does it for you?
Zainab, you're putting us on the spot because you want us to reveal how travel we are.
Yes.
Which, on the other hand, could also be about what is our ecological footprint because of the conversation. How I look at it is in terms of the parameters of green. One is public transportation. And by the way, as I speak about this, let's also learn to celebrate the gains that we have made. We may not be there yet, but some gains have been made. Even in Nairobi, Susan may push back, but the truth is Nairobi has made strides. I know this for sure that in 2004, I was part of some research on non-motorized transport. I was looking at the legal aspects. We had somebody looking at the sociological, somebody was economic. Then we had the lead consultant was an engineer. And one of the conclusions was that all future roads needed to have provision for non-motorized transport, walkways, bicycle lanes. And I've actually seen that come up over the years. So that's something to celebrate. When I look at public transportation, a city like Dar es Salaam is beginning to have it because you're having rapid bus transport lanes that are actually working. Of course, Kigali, I agree. If you're looking at energy efficiencies, you begin to also look at that. Outside of Africa, Seoul, Korea is actually a very green city. Public transport is a really, really good, which limits use of private means, but also in terms of location of amenities between residences and places of work as a way of just giving incentives. And then using technology to determine, even in terms of movement of traffic. So you are lessening traffic jams because those are ways in which climate change emissions, gases are taking place. And that's what we need to be doing here in Nairobi as well. So I would say let's celebrate the gains that we've made as well.
Okay, so now let's get into the closing remarks. Dr. Habib, what would you like us to remember when we leave here in a minute? What would you like us to remember when we leave here?
So I want us to remember that we are all here. We have government representatives. We have members of non-government organizations that are present. We have researchers. And some of the deliberations that have been made so far, the previous panel discussed about how we can provide money for this climate change adaptation. So I want us to take some of these discussions that we have had today and work on it. We have all the stakeholders present here. We have the government. We have all the important stakeholders. We need to embrace a kind of integrated approach. As I said, government will not do it alone. Citizens will not do it alone. Private sectors will not do it alone. We must adopt integrated approach to ensure that we have green and sustainable African cities.
Thank you. Susan, your parting shot?
Well, as UN Habitat, we are mandated to promote sustainable and inclusive cities. And for my parting shot, I would say the best city for us and the best human settlements should be one that a 3-year-old and a 90-year-old can walk comfortably without worrying about safety, without worrying about bad design, without worrying about being excluded. So we should leave no one behind.
Maurice?
That's our partner, the UN Habitat. At Habitat for Humanity, we say every person deserves a place to call home. And we know home is not just about 4 walls and a roof. It's about all the amenities that make that place livable. Let's make that happen. But it is not one person's job. Let's embrace SDG 17 on partnerships, because partnerships are the way of the future and the way to the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Let's leave no one behind. A green city, your parting shot, Susan, was your green city is where a 3-year-old and a 90-year-old both have to move around without worrying about safety or bad design. Larry, I wonder what your parting shot is. What do you remember from this conversation?
Well, the big parting shot has to do with the government cannot do it alone. We have to do it together. And that's one thing that I've picked from this, is that every single person has to do their bit to ensure that we make our city not only movable, as she said, that we need to have ease of movement, but also a place that is hospitable and habitable enough for us to be able to enjoy the luxuries of living in a city.
Do you think your house is green?
My house is nowhere near green. I mean, the color, yes, but other than that, no. But at least, I don't have the AC. My windows are always open for fresh air, and if it's hot, it's hot, and that's how I live with it.
Great. So we have to make room for the next panel.
Yes, definitely. So the next panel is going to be talking about matters climate change narratives and, of course, mobilizing action. And this next panel, of course, is going to be driven by Joa Gale, who I can say is my friend. Everybody has been running away from that term the whole day. This one I can say is my friend. And this is a group editorial director of a Nation Media Group PLC. And, of course, I'm going to call Joa Gale up. And as he's coming up, we also have our panelists. First of all, we are going to see a lady who I think is no stranger to most of the conservation debate when it comes to wildlife issues in Kenya. And this is Dr. Paula Kahumbu. That is the CEO of Wildlife Direct. We also have Otula Owor, who is the founding editor, Science Africa. And we also have Karimot Odebode, gender equality activist and founder of Black Girls' Dreams. And also virtually, we are going to be joined by Miss Joanne Clark, who is a senior lecturer at Department of Arts History and World Art Studies, University of East Anglia in the UK. So these four people are going to be taking us through the next panel discussion. And of course, don't forget that in case you've got any questions, you can put them on the portal. In case you've got any comments, please, for our viewers who are joining us at home, you can also, put them on Twitter. Our hashtag that we're using is Kusi Festa 2022. We're going to be looking at sampling some of your questions as they come across. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think let's give them a round of applause as they, settle in. And, of course, Joa Gale, even before you get started, we keep talking about cascading this to the grassroots, ensuring that every single person in the grassroots can actually be able to relate with issues of climate change. And Swahili is our operational word. I don't know if Joa Gale, you can tell us what climate change is in Kiswahili.
Nafikiri mabadiliko ya tabia nchi.
Mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Oh my goodness. He Googled that before he came on. Anyway, Joa Gale, karibu sana.
All right. Thank you very much, Larry. And yes, I can confirm that Larry is my friend. Yeah, because that seems to be something going on around here. And thank you very much for joining us for this session. And here we're going to be talking about climate change narratives and mobilizing action. And one of the easiest, commonest definitions of narrative is a story. So we are going to be talking about climate change stories and how those stories then translate to action. And right here, I'm going to introduce my panel here. And I'm going to start with Otula Owor. Otula Owor is the founding editor of Science Africa. And many people who know him in this country, some of us science journalists, at least we claim to be, know him as the father of science journalism in Kenya. He has done this over the years, and so he will have interesting things to say. Next to Otula Owor is Karimot Odebode, the founder of Black Girls' Dream Initiative. She's also a poet and a lawyer and a lot of other things. In your program, she's been called gender equality activist, but is also a youth activist. And in many respects, she is a storyteller. And we're going to hear a lot more about that. And next to me, Dr. Paula Kahumbu, many of you know him, is a leading conservationist here in Kenya. She's the CEO of Wildlife Direct, an ecologist by training, but also a storyteller. She's on TV many times, on different films, telling stories about wildlife, and we'll see how that connects to climate change in a short while. Last but not least, Dr. Joanne Clark, who is going to be joining us virtually from the UK. She is a senior lecturer at the University of East Anglia in the School of World Art Studies. And she is an archaeologist, but she's also doing a lot of work on the nexus between African heritage, interestingly, and the impact climate change has on that. My name is Joe Ageo, and I'll be leading this session. For the next 60 minutes or so, we are going to be telling stories here. And let me start here with you, Dr. Kahumbu. This is an interesting connection. So you have been in wildlife all of these years talking about it, and over the last few months, we've seen quite some impacts in, national parks in the Tsavo. There were all these horrifying images of wildlife dying, and a lot of people are putting down to the prolonged drought that is directly connected to climate change. As someone who's been in this space for a long time, tell us what you've seen happening to wildlife as a result of climate change.